Today, our session is on the topic Instability in Myanmar, Implications for Bangladesh and the Region, in collaboration with Bipss and Dhaka Tribune. The moderators are Major General A.N.M. Moniruzzaman, President of Bipss, and Mr. Zafar Sobhan, Editor of Dhaka Tribune. I would like to request the moderators to carry on the rest of the session. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, Assalamu alaikum and a very good morning to all of you after last night's cyclone. Thankfully, the weather has cleared and we are set to start a very interesting session today talking about issues in Myanmar and how those internal issues in Myanmar might affect Bangladesh and the region as a whole. Myanmar is Bangladesh's only other neighbor except India. A country as big as Myanmar, resourceful, populated, but yet it has been in trouble for many years and decades. Recently, after the Rohingya refugee migration or influx to Bangladesh, the events have even unfolded in Myanmar in a very negative manner. Especially after the February 21 coup in that country, the country has become unstable with a number of issues which are unfolding and in a dynamic manner. Myanmar is extremely multi-ethnic, and the different regions have different agendas and aspirations. As a matter of fact, there are currently 13 ongoing insurgencies going in that country. All of them are active insurgencies. There are over 12 to 15 various insurgent groups that are fighting the Myanmar state and the Myanmar army or the Tatmadaw. So all these inner instability and infighting has consequences beyond the borders of Myanmar, in particular towards Bangladesh border. The Bangladesh border with Myanmar has been unstable for many years now. Especially the events in the Rakhine state has direct consequences on Bangladesh. Of late, we see a renewed activity of Arakan army in the Rakhine state. The Arakan army, which primarily started operating in 2009 in the Kachin state and then got trained by the Kachin Independent Army or KIA, has then moved to Rakhine to operate in that country and are claiming an independent space for themselves in the Rakhine state. That has now brought about the Tatmadaw into a major operation in the Rakhine state. Quite often, that operation is crisscrossing the Bangladesh border in terms of firepower and in terms of airspace violation. It is important for us to understand the strategic significance of Rakhine when we discuss the events in that state of Myanmar and how it affects Bangladesh. The Rakhine state is geostrategically, geoeconomically, and geoenergy-wise extremely important to a number of major powers. It is in this state that China has now built the deep sea port in Chakpyu. And Chakpyu is not only a port, it is a major energy hub for China. It is also pumping out sweet gas in the same region and piping it back to Yunnan. It also has refineries in plan in the same space. There are special economic zones of China being built in the Rakhine state. For China, this is a major energy hub, and it also gives them the ability to bypass the energy security that emanates out of the Malacca Straits passage. There are similar Indian interests in the Rakhine State by the Indians because they are in the process of completing the Kaladan multimodal highway from Sitwe port back into the Indian Northeast. Half of the highway has now been built, and it's a major strategic interest for the Indians. The Russians are now also eyeing at building several special economic zones in the Rakhine State. So all three states which are closely associated with the Myanmar government and the Tatmadaw are Indians, the Russians, and the Chinese. So you can imagine what sort of great power interest is coming into Myanmar, and in particular to the Rakhine State. Although Myanmar is our neighbor, and the only other neighbor, as I said, except India, but it is also the neighbor which is least understood by Bangladesh side. It is in my appreciation and understanding that we have not engaged them sufficiently, historically, although it's a close neighbor. And since the complications of the Rohingya refugees being housed in Bangladesh and the military coup that took place in February 2021, we are now in a state of relationship where there is very little contact with Myanmar. It also worries me that we have very little contact at the track 1 level, and there is no contact at the track 2 level. So all sorts of communication and contact with Myanmar has now been stalled, and that is not a happy situation for any bilateral relationship. So there is plenty to discuss on the various aspects and the dynamics of the events in Myanmar and our bilateral relationship and the regional consequences. We have an excellent panel to discuss this today. And at least one of our panelists has ground experience of having lived and worked in Myanmar for many years. So therefore, I would like to go straight to our panels today to start the discussion. Each of the panelists will take about 10 to 15 minutes to give the deliberations. Then we open the floor for an open floor discussion. So with that very brief introduction, I will now turn to Major General Mohammad Shahidul Haq, who was a former defense attaché in Myanmar and also a former ambassador to Libya. Shahid, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, sir. Good morning, gentlemen, ladies and gentlemen. I'll start with the Myanmar topic. Especially, I'll be touching upon, I'll rather introduce you what is Myanmar. Then I'll touch upon the military side. Then finally, why Myanmar is so important in 21st century. This is the subject I'm going to cover. First of all, in 2012, one of the Myanmar ambassadors complained to me that Bangladesh looks east beyond Myanmar. In a sense, he's right. And also right that Bangladesh doesn't exist in Myanmar periphery. So before I actually go into the my subject, which I'm going to describe, we have to understand the Myanmar's pushes and pulls before coming into a conclusive conclusion. Myanmar is a very complex country, as is history. Myanmar is composed of many nationalities, rather some of the independent countries before British arrived. Rather, after 1948, during the independence, all the nationalities were forced into one nation. That is what is called today's Myanmar. In fact, there is no change since 1948. It used to be ruled by major ethnic group, which we call Bamars, like Aung San Suu Kyi's ethnic group. They are the one who is controlling everything under the sun in Myanmar since 1948. In fact, Myanmar never saw peace. The only peace in the history, in its hundreds of years of history, the only time it has actually seen peace and enjoyed peace was during British colonial time. Otherwise, it is always at war during kings, kingships, and of course after 48. In fact, Myanmar is constantly at war with its bordering states, especially the ethnic group which are residing in all the borders, less the central plain. I'll come later on what do I mean by central plain. In 1948, just before, correction, in 1946, just before the independence, in 1948, Jan Aung San, he's the father of Aung San Suu Kyi. He had an idea that why not, whatever the Myanmar, British Myanmar at that time, why not we form a single country and we stay there for 10 years. If we don't like it, then we go away. This is the one you must have heard, that Panlong Peace Treaty or Panlong dialogue, which is very popularly known around the world, which Aung San Suu Kyi also tried after coming to power in 2014. Unfortunately, Aung San was killed before 1948, and things went back to square one where it was. The Burmas still, they were ruling, and they had been ruling since 1948 without implementing the famous Panlong agreement. To be told that Myanmar was never integrated into a one nation. As I was saying, not only it was not integrated in one nation, but there is a term which is very popular in Myanmar, also some of the scholars outside, Burmanization. Everything they do is Burmanization. And what does it mean? It means you as an ethnic group, or those who had been a country before British arrived, they cannot claim their culture, they cannot claim their history. And this is the root cause of all the instability and the fighting with this one. Like, let's say, example with Arakan. Arakan had been an independent country for a long time, till 18th century, early 18th century. At that time, Burmese king captured Arakan, and rest is history, you know. But at this moment, Arakanis, they cannot claim that they were an independent country. Neither they can claim they have got a separate culture. Neither they can claim they have got a different line of Buddhism in Arakan. So this is what is called Burmanization. And this is exactly what is happening in Myanmar. In fact, another thing happened for the last 2 decades plus, that Myanmar hasn't seen any major fighting, less 2012. It doesn't mean that Myanmar is at peace. It means Myanmar government has undergone a major political and strategical decision. What they have done, they have given concession to all those major insurgent groups. In that concession, what is done, these insurgent group, they can, they can do business, they have got power plant, they run big casinos, they do the drug business, and some of them have got weapon factories, and whatnot. I mean, totally it is everything they do. Only thing is that they remain within the Union of Burma. So with that one, that's how it is maintained a peace since 2001. Also, it doesn't mean that all the ethnic groups, they have disbanded themselves. As Sir was saying that around 12 to 13 insurgents. In fact, all the insurgents groups are there. They are updating their weapons. They have modernized, and some of them have got weapon factory in their areas. Also, they have got APCs. They don't have aircraft. Otherwise, everything they have got. So it is there, but this is a very uneasy peace at that moment in Myanmar. Another one is very popular in democratization in Myanmar. I call it's a myth. Why? Because if you look at the constitution of 2008, this is a constitution of exclusion. It is not encompassing all the ethnic group or everybody in the society. I'll give you one example. It is designed to exclude Aung San Suu Kyi from being a president of the country. There's a special clause and sub-clause in there. So, as I was saying this, whatever we saw the transition to the Myanmar, where everybody had been celebrating that, okay, she's a de facto leader and all those I can assure you those are a myth. I mean, later on, since subject is very vast, I might, during question answers, why I call it myth. She actually didn't have any power to do, but yes, she is being propagated as being a power over there. So, by the way, it's very unfortunate to say that Aung San Suu Kyi is also not a Democrat. She is as hateful, as Bamar, as anybody on the street of Yangon. So this is a very, very unfortunate. You can see what happened after 2014 till she was ousted last year. It's ironic that West and US, they do not see beyond Aung San Suu Kyi. I repeat the word. US, Britain, and some of its allies, they don't see beyond Aung San Suu Kyi. That's the problem. And this is the one which is prolonging the suffering of Myanmar people. Now let's come to the ethnic group. There are 135 ethnic groups in Myanmar officially recognized by Myanmar government as per the constitution. And unfortunately, in reality, there are more. At one time, they had 148 ethnic groups. But as I was saying, the things are there in Myanmar for exclusion, while the rules and regulations are made for exclusion, not for inclusion. In that ethnic group, Bamars, Aung San Suu Kyi's ethnic group, they are 68%, Shan is 9%, and others are chronologically over there. At this moment, there are 800,000 Rohingyas inside Myanmar. And outside Myanmar, about 2 million. This calculation is mine because 1 million is here. In 70s, we gave visa to 250,000 Rohingyas, and also Pakistan also gave 250,000. So it is about 500,000. I mean, if you add plus minus 2 million Rohingyas are outside Myanmar. Now let's come to the leadership. It's very unfortunate since other than Aung San Suu Kyi as a civilian, there is no leadership grew or there at this moment in Myanmar. After Aung San Suu Kyi, who is next? Unfortunately, nobody knows. Next is religion. That's very interesting. In Myanmar, a proverb is said, it is in vogue for about more than thousands of years. It is said, to be a Burmese, to be a Buddhist. That means you have to be Buddhist to be called yourself as a Burmese. And in fact, it was coined in 1044 by one of the kings. So you can very well understand what does it mean, that there is hardly any space for other people. Myanmar, they follow Theravada Buddhism. This is one of the southern sect of Buddhism. It is kind of strict, orthodox Buddhism, though this is a little bit different from the Pali. So, I mean, all in the southern portion from Sri Lanka to Myanmar and up to little bit Japan, they all follow southern portion of the southern sect of Buddhism, which is we call Theravada Buddhism. Myanmarese, they also follow religiously numerology and astrology. And there is a government appointed astrologist who actually who is consulted before any major decision taken by the Myanmar government. Like, I'll give you one example. When to release Aung San Suu Kyi from the jail, this was also consulted. Number one, when to hold election in 2011, that was also consulted with the astrologist. When to move capital from Yangon to Naypyidaw, that was also consultation with astrologists. So these are the lots of things there. Also, they are very, very superstitious. I'll give you an example. In 1987, just because of the one simple decision based on superstition, it has destroyed the whole Myanmar economy, and effect is being felt till today. Nguyen, at that time, Nguyen was in power. Somebody, one of the monks said, that we have got 10 or 50 charts, 100 charts. Wherever there is a 0 in the notes, these are considered as bad luck. So what to do? So you introduce those notes which is divisible by 9. So what he did, he introduced 45 chart and 90 chart notes. You will find in Yangon Street these charts being sold as souvenirs. So this is what, and that destruction of the economy is being felt till today in Myanmar. They are also very superstitious, and especially another one incident which need to be told, that driving from the right side of the road or left side of the road is also based on the superstitions. Somebody told Neville in 1974 that driving on the left side is bad omen. So what he did overnight, he said, okay, we'll drive from the right side. And that's what the chaos in Myanmar. Myanmar, you find cars are right-hand driven, but they drive on the right side. And including the receiving porches are also the way we do on the left side of driving. So this is what it is about superstition. Another superstition which is related to us is that white elephant. All of you know that, I don't know, you may know it, that white elephant, whitish elephant is only available in Bandarbon of Bangladesh. But at one time it used to be, it used to graze till Thailand. So in their mythology, it is said that any king or any ruler who finds out a white elephant in their rule, it is a bad luck, it's a good luck. So what he did in just before Jan Thanshui left, he paid some purchase in Bandarbon 50 lakhs taka to drive the horse to the Myanmar side. There he paid another lakhs of charts to Myanmarese holders, purchase. What they did, they caught 2 to 3 white elephants, and they took them, carried them all the way to Yangon, spending millions of dollars and deputing one lieutenant general to do that. If you go to the Naypyidaw, you'll find those 2 white elephants inside one of the pagodas. So in the superstition, having said that one, now I'll touch upon the military. Military is all powerful. I'll just quickly run down about this one. It's all powerful institution. It has got 5 command, 14 regional command like corps in our army, and it has got 20 light infantry divisions, and also other regional commands. But in one nutshell, I'll say that Myanmar military is designed to fight its insurgency, not the external threat. The only external threat it has recognized in their paper is they call it nearest to enemy is historical foe, Thailand. Otherwise, in case of Bangladesh, they don't consider Bangladesh as their enemy by seeing their concept, by seeing their deployment, and by seeing their employment of their weapons and other things. And also the Myanmar use one of the most dreaded concept of war, insurgency, counterinsurgency, they call it 4 cuts. And 4 cuts is, they supply the food, funds, and recruits and information to the resistance group. And with that one, for doing this one, they actually follow the scorched earth policy. They burn down everything. Just yesterday also, you must have seen that in the news, 50 Myanmaris also killed in that attack. In my assessment, military assessment, if I say that Myanmar is a severely understrength and also equipped. It is not designed to take any external threat. Yes, it might intrude in Bangladesh, but it cannot sustain into operation. The depth of the operation is limited to battalion level, that is 1 to 2 kilometers, but beyond that it cannot operate. Then second one is under-equipment. It is highly under-equipped. It cannot sustain itself in the fighting. Having said that, I'll just, can I take 5 minutes?
1 minute.
1 minute, right, sir. Importance of Myanmar, I just touch upon this one. Today in 21st century, thanks to, I'll say, the Americans, had they been careful in 1996, they could have stopped the rise of China. And with the rise of China, we can see that in 21st century, the importance of Myanmar, as I can show, you can see on the map, all the routes and roads and energy hubs passes through Myanmar. In fact, Myanmar has given the breathing space to India and China. For India, they have right to bypass the chicken neck, which is called Siliguri corridor, and for China, they have given breathing space to alternative to Malacca Strait by passing, having a link from Chengdu to Yunnan, a direct link where gas and oil, which is already operational, they are going to build. They are going to build the railway, roads, and a lot of other system. So I'll end over here. If you have got doubt, maybe we'll discuss it during the question answer session. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Shahid, for giving us an insight into the very complex nature of the Myanmar state and the Myanmar societies. It is an unique state. It operates in a very different manner than the conventional functioning of any other state, not only from the religious point of view, from the point of view of the tremendous role of astrologers and astrology in that country, and also a very concocted history that they have inherited in that country. So we'll have sufficient time to discuss all these in a Q&A session. I shall now turn to our next speaker, and she's Salma Tarin, an assistant professor of the Department of International Relations in the Bangladesh University of Professionals. So Tarin, you have the floor.
Thank you everyone for coming. Very good morning to you all. As we have already heard some aspects regarding the military junta of Myanmar, now I would like to highlight upon some key aspects of national unity government, which we need to discuss as part of the current crisis, because that particular entity is currently one of the major stakeholders in this crisis, and also we need to understand what kind of support that particular entity is having internationally or inside Myanmar, and what are their strategies, and also I'll be highlighting upon what kind of support or role big powers, that means essentially the regional powers, are playing in this particular crisis. And because understanding the support or the nature of attention they are giving towards this crisis or offering towards this crisis is key to understand our approach to, with regard to this crisis, because we cannot just think about Myanmar and Bangladesh. We need to think about Myanmar from the geopolitical point of view. So if we talk about a national unity government, we probably know that it was formed in 2021, just immediately after the coup in April 2021, and their objective was primarily to check or to challenge the military from having overall control or total control of the territories in Myanmar. The goal was or has been to establish a federal union, although this is a very high ambitious goal for NUG, but they're trying to include stakeholders from civil societies, community leaders, and most of these members of NUG are from the NLD, were working under NLD. And also they're trying to project responsible governance. They have established their Ministry of Defense, their Ministry of Commerce, their Ministry of Health, and they have been trying to do a lot of things. For example, COVID-19 task force was formed by them, and they tried to offer vaccination to people who were, anti-Janta group. Those people are offered vaccines and other essential health support by this particular national unity government. And mostly the most important goal or objective right now for NUG, I think, is gaining international support or recognition, because they are trying heart and soul to gain that recognition from different international communities, including states and international organizations. So this NUG, one of the major aspects is they have formed the People's Defensive Force, under which different local defense organizations who are mostly autonomous, and also there are some groups who are working under NUG's Ministry of Defense. So People's Defensive Force is, we basically refer to it as the group of all the parties who are fighting against Janta in Myanmar right now. They have also tried to form a central command coordinate committee, but a lot of work remains to be seen in that case, because as we have heard, Myanmar is a very dynamic space, and there has been so many insurgency groups, so many ethnic armed groups. So bringing all of them under a common People's Defensive Force is really a tough task to do, and the success still remains to be seen, because the command structure, this committee is not actually working or coordinating all these things, all these groups is a big challenge for national unity government. And that's why, although a recent special advisory committee for Myanmar, which was comprised of human rights officials, former human rights officials of UN, they have recently came out with a brief about Myanmar, and they are telling that things are already shaping in Myanmar, inside Myanmar, and the international community should recognize this NUG as soon as possible. And they are saying that already more than 50% territories are under NUG, and only 17% of territories are being governed by, successfully or effectively being governed by Tatmadaw. Although we don't know what is actually happening exactly in that, in the conflict zone, but still, the very recent report which came in September 5th, I think it gives a lot of hope as well, or it adds new dimension to the war. And since this particular committee is giving this data, and it shows that although initially the NUG has faced a lot of problems, and still they have a lot of problems with regard to command control structure, and also coordinating all the ethnic armed groups who have divergence of objectives and targets or strategies. So still they have a lot of things to do, and but I think to some extent they have gained success in controlling some territories or a lot of territories in Myanmar. And in terms of its recognition, I think one of the major success of NUG in terms of international recognition, I think so far no country is trying to recognize them explicitly or officially, but overtly many countries are trying to support them. Very recently, European Union's Parliament has has told that they are going to support national unity government. But even USA, their national security advisor, Jake Sullivan, he met with NUG, and different other countries are also having online and offline different types of meetings with NUG, but still we don't see a lot of hope with regard to recognizing NUG very explicitly. And I think because of these developments, we are yet to see what is going to happen, whether NUG is really going to take over a lot of territories from Myanmar and going to take over the government. I think the international community is behaving in a very strategic way, because they also don't know what is going to happen in near future. So they're trying to be also very calculative about the coming, about the government, selecting or recognizing the government in Myanmar, although most of them are right now definitely supporting or recognizing this particular Tatmadaw government. In terms of regional stability, I think definitely if Myanmar has been one of the most destabilizing factor in Southeast Asia and also in this region, because it affects also India, Bangladesh. In terms of instability, I think it's not only Bangladesh who has been facing the consequences of the crisis in Myanmar, rather Thailand. Several times Myanmar has violated the airspace of Thailand as well. And also they fired their artillery there, and also people are killed in Thailand also. And in case of India, we see recently, I mean in 2021, around 16,000 people migrated to India. Because of the conflict between Tatmadaw and different insurgency groups. So it has also created a tension within Indian government, and although they have successfully sealed their border and they follow basically the policy of identify, detain and deport, so they have successfully sealed their entry points, and for them probably it is not creating a lot of consequences. But still, if this conflict continues, or if the insurgency groups in Northeast India, these groups previously Indian government and the military junta in Myanmar, they used to fight counterinsurgency operations together, and also India got a lot of support from Myanmar in fighting their northeastern insurgent groups. But if right now the military is trying to use those northeastern insurgent groups against the anti-junta forces, so that can accelerate or that can intensify the insurgency movements which are going on in Northeast India. So for India, that can also create a very, that can be, the conflict can be a very destabilizing factor. Although India is not, not very concerned about those aspects, rather it is trying to focus more on its other goals like geopolitical goals and its competition with China. I'll try to cover those just a few minutes later. And also China is also facing, the consequences of these crises, I think, because a lot of people are moving to the Yunnan province as well, and also due to this crisis, there are militias, fight between militias, drug cartels, military. So everyone is trying to gain control of territories and resources across China-Myanmar border as well. And there are some groups in that area, for example, United Wa State Army, so which was being supported by China for a long time, and now the military do not want to give them their special administrative rights, and that's how the border in China and Myanmar is also becoming unstable. And So in terms of instability, I think this particular issue, not only the refugee crisis, but also a lot of small arms and a lot of drugs are entering into Myanmar. So as a whole, it affects the regional stability, I think. And the big powers, I think we cannot just do whatever we want to do with regard to Myanmar. We cannot be driven by emotional interests or emotional drives, because we need to think about the geopolitical realities. There is China and India, and who are on two sides of Myanmar, and China is a big power, and China have a lot of interest within Myanmar. So China, although when Aung San Suu Kyi government came to power, then China found it very difficult to get aligned with Myanmar, because the government was more aligned to the West, the Myanmar government. But when the 2017 refugee crisis occurred, that time China took it as an opportunity to go to, with a friendly gesture towards Myanmar, and then they initiated the China-Myanmar Economic Corridor project. And also, China has significant interest in Myanmar, because China considers Myanmar as its West Coast dream, or China has this West Coast dream where they see the Chakpiu port as a very essential port for accessing their Indian Ocean, and also for accessing the Pacific, and also to use it as an alternative to the Malacca Strait, which is sometimes dominated by US military. And also, through this port, they can ensure their naval, their navy's presence in the Indian Ocean. And also, one of the China's major geopolitical goal here is keeping United States away from this region. For China has been always telling that this is the nation problem, and we should try to solve it within Asia with Asian power. So that is another issue that China never wants. China wants to have as much as control over this territory. And with regard to India, as I already mentioned, that the northeastern region, that might become more unstable due to this crisis. So that is one issue, and most important issue, I think, from geopolitical perspective, is the rivalry with China and the competition with China. As China is trying to increase its infrastructural presence and its control over this particular region, India is also trying to compete over there, and they have invested significantly in the Kaladan multimodal transport, and although the process, although the construction of this particular project is not going the way they wanted, but still, although slow, but this is a major development for India-China relation. And also, India has the leverage, I think, to work as a mediator between the Western community and Myanmar, because Myanmar economy has shrunk over last year for up to 18%. And also they have been facing the consequences of sanctions, and development assistance are reducing. So probably India will try also to use that opportunity to work as a mediator between Myanmar and also the Western community. Can I take 2 minutes?
Question hour.
Okay. All right. Thank you, everyone. I'll be happy to answer any questions with regard to what should Bangladesh do or other things. Thank you.
Thank you, Taryn. You touched upon the issues of NUG. As we analyze, we see that NUG has not been able to consolidate its base and power that was expected. But what is interesting is that the PDF is now getting into agreements with several of these insurgent groups. And the PDF and the insurgent groups, in some cases, are fighting a joint battle against the Tatmadaw. But on the downside, the PDF is fractured. So there is hardly any PDF unity that we see across Myanmar. But it is absolutely essential for us to understand and identify that Myanmar is in early stages of civil war. especially because of the inclusion of PDF. So with that kind of a civil war, we can expect and we should be prepared that there could be an influx of conflict refugees out of Myanmar. We should also be prepared that we can have a second wave of Rohingya refugees being thrown out of Myanmar, and the likely destination will be Bangladesh again. So a combination of second wave of Rohingya refugees heading towards Bangladesh and a potential conflict refugees again heading out of Myanmar is a serious problem that we should be all considering and be prepared to cope with. So those are the flashpoints we should be prepared to identify and be prepared for. We also see that Myanmar is an extremely resourceful country. It may be the most resourceful country in the region. And therefore, many of the internal conflicts that we see within Myanmar is also related to resources. So there is a fair amount of warlordism that goes on in the various states and the insurgencies. We see, for example, the Shan state, and with the Shan state army, it is almost a state within a state because it controls the resources of that state. Myanmar currently is under severe sanctions by the West. That is taking a fair amount of economic bite within the internal economy of the country. And therefore, the internal economic turmoil or the instability might also send out economic migrants out of that country. To discuss the economic aspects and the various issues of economic instability and the allied issues, we now have Professor Karim Mabasi, Assistant Professor of the Department of Economics of the East-West University, giving us his thoughts. So Professor, you have the floor, please.
Thank you, sir. And good morning to the assembled audience. It falls on my lot to discuss about boring issues. So again, but let me give you an itinerary of what I'm going to discuss today. Number one, a brief snapshot of the economy of Myanmar, especially post-coup of February 2021. Number two, the economy of Tatmadaw, which is more important. Number three, and I'll explain why. Number three, the narcotics-based economy. Number four, a brief peek into sanctions and its efficacy. Number five, the economic war, which is waged by the various insurgents in Myanmar. And if I get the time, number six, the rare earth calculus in Myanmar. So here we go. It doesn't take any rocket science to say that Myanmar is facing severe economic stress. But then again, which country isn't? Ranging from Germany all the way to United Kingdom to poor old Bangladesh. Everybody is facing a crisis. But Myanmar has a different complexity to its problem. And its crisis has been exacerbated by the double blow of COVID-19 and the Russia-Ukraine conflict. And along with this, the instability that has been generated because of the coup that has taken place in February 2021. Let me give you a few facts and figures. GDP in 2019 per capita was $1,400, and Myanmar was making rapid strides because, as many of the speakers have indicated, Myanmar is rich in resources. And it was almost double the figure that it was in 2008. And it was expected that it would catch up with its ASEAN peers within a couple of, or at least within a decade or so. However, and poverty rate was down to 25%. So things were looking sunny. After the coup, because of the crisis, the infighting that has taken place with the NUG and its PDFs, the People's Defense Forces, and the various ethnic armed organizations, namely the Arakan Army, the Kia, and other groups that you have in the Chin state. Right now, in 2021, Myanmar has had the worst recession recorded globally, whereby its economy contracted by 18%. poverty rates are, again, have jumped up to 40%. Vaccination, in terms of COVID-19 vaccination, Myanmar has the lowest record amongst ASEAN countries at 40%. This only goes to show the level of instability that is breeding on. You have a range of low-intensity armed conflicts almost verging on open civil war. And that has had a massive impact on the economy. Add to this the sanctions by the West, led by the United States of America, United Kingdom, Australia, and later on European Union, all together according in concert, which has these targeted sanctions has hit military-owned enterprises, which is basically the backbench, or which is the cornerstone of Myanmar's economy. If I just give you a few numbers, inflation last year was around 18% in Myanmar. The Myanmar's currency, the kyat, has depreciated by 30%. There are 3 exchange rates in Myanmar. One is the official exchange rate, one is the informal exchange rate, another one is the Facebook exchange rate. But the informal exchange rate, which is a rough indicator, is $1 is equal to 4,500 to 5,000 kyats. And again, petrol prices has shot up by 57%. The prices of basic commodities have gone up by 57%. Not mine. These are information from the Myanmarese ministry. Because again, this will say that there's a Western slant to it, or anti-Myanmar. So again, the economy is under a lot of crisis. Along with this, if the economy is in such a manner, and whenever we see that there's a crisis in the economy, the elites start to leave. And this is exactly the case in case of Myanmar, where the elites, the ones who are super connected, the ones who are former Tatmadaw, or again business cronies or business associates of Tatmadaw. Now, there has been a mass exodus. 80% of the wealth of the elites have left the country, according to sources inside Myanmar. Where has the wealth gone to? Dubai, Singapore, Thailand, and surprise, surprise, British Virgin Islands. And again, over here, if you look into Thailand, for example, the second largest foreign buyers of condominiums within the kingdom are basically the Myanmaris. The Chinese are number 1. That only goes to show that there's a great degree of lack of confidence in Myanmar. But all said and done, Myanmar's economy, which has contracted by 18% in 2021, is supposed to grow by 3% this year, according to World Bank's predictions. World Bank is not a soothsayer, and it's not always correct. But one of the reasons why the economy has revved up is because it has substantial foreign direct investment coming from several countries, which has already been mentioned. Number 1, China. Number 2, Singapore. Number 3, Japan. Number 4, South Korea. And number 5 or 6 actually is India. So basically the ASEAN countries have been propping up Myanmar because of, again, the abundance of resource riches. And of course, there's also thriving trade that Myanmar has in terms of weapons with Russia. But this has also given Myanmar some amount of cover. But for how long will this economy manage to grow with so much of difficulty and unrest remains to be seen. That takes care of the economy of Myanmar. Now comes the more important part, the economics of Tatmadaw. Because just like they used to say about Prussia, that basically in case of Prussia, it's an army with a state, not a state with an army. So Tatmadaw is basically an army with a state, which is named Myanmar, as the West likes to call it Burma in Anglosphere. But basically, Tatmadaw comes first. And its economic control of the resources is completely chiseled into the constitution. Let me give you a little bit of insight as to how strong the Myanmarese, Tatmadaw's control on the Myanmarese economy is. Now, if we look into this, it has been in power since 1962, directly or indirectly. And during that time, it has managed to rack up $2 billion of arms worth of $2 billion worth of arms, which is acquired from various purchases from different countries, and has 70 years of combating experiences. Now, based on official estimates, and you can only basically add on to it, is 13 to 14% of GDP. It is actually higher. For a case of reference, Bangladesh's GDP, the amount that we spend on defense is not even 1.5%. But then again, you have to understand, these are two countries with two different civilizational objectives. Myanmar follows military fiscalism, where the military or Tatmadaw comes first. Along with this, it generates substantial revenue from the Myanmar Economic Holding Limited, MEHL, and Myanmar Economic Corporation. And every stage of economic activity, they have their presence. From banking to insurance to tourism to hotels to spa centers to jade mining, oil and gas, each and every one of them is controlled by the Tatmadaw. Jade trade alone nets in billions of dollars for the Chinese, for the Myanmaris, because the main export market is basically China. MEHL has netted between approximately, these are conservative estimates, $18 billion from 1990 to 2010. And the army stays in support because of this lush funds that they have, and they basically donate, or they basically make donations to Buddhist monasteries who are kingmakers over there, and also to basically the intelligentsia over there. And the modernization of Tatmadaw has been based on the proceeds of these revenues that have come in. That takes us also, and again, where have they spent this money on? Tatmadaw, largely on arms, acquiring arms. And who are the countries who have been beneficiary of this largesse of the Tatmadaw? Russia, China, India, Israel, and Pakistan. It seems our South Asian neighbors can agree on one thing, at least that's exporting or selling arms to Myanmar. Good for them. Now, that takes us to the third component. So how much time do I have?
Another 3 minutes.
Let me then just rush on to the narcotics trade. Narcotics trade is also a hallmark of Myanmar. And as we know, a fragile state can be identified by the preponderance of narcotics trade. The total value of the Mekong Delta drug trade is around $40 billion. And over here, Myanmar is the second largest producer of heroin, the biggest producer of methamphetamine, which is basically yaba, or which is called baba in our villages. I don't know why. And again, the Shan state has the biggest yaba production factories in the world. The Northern War state, which is between the Shan state and China, has one of the biggest drug labs. So, Myanmar can be accused of basically imposing economic warfare on us by basically displacing the Rohingyas, and also narcotics warfare on us, because increasingly yaba and crystal meth are coming from Myanmar. So this has become a matter of national security. More so than perceived aggression on the border, this has become the biggest threat to our future, our youth's future, and our country's prosperity. What about the sanctions regime? Credit must be given where it's due. The United States of America can be faulted for many things, but it has taken the lead in terms of basically sanctioning Myanmar's atrocities. And these are targeted sanctions. However, the sanctions are not working efficaciously because there are no secondary sanctions, because there is concern about basically adversely affecting the welfare of the ordinary people. So as a result, the net of the sanctions is not all pervasive. But there has been recent developments. Myanmar has been put on the blacklist of Financial Action Task Force, which will greatly impede many of the revenue processing of the Tatmadaw, and many of their banks, like Myanmar Bank and Minawadi Bank, Inwa Bank, they have been basically sanctioned.
But there are some more banks which are also ripe for sanctions, which in due time I hope there is pressure. But why is Myanmar basically evading the sanctions? Again, China, India, ASEAN, Japan. And Japan has to be accountable for this because it is all with the West on many issues, but in this case, Japan has its own different philosophy. We might respect this, but then again, Japan, South Korea for that matter, or for Singapore, though increasingly there's a little bit of distance between Tatmadaw and Singapore. These are the countries which are enabling cash flow. And as a result, the sanctions are not effective. And in order to move away from dollar-based transaction, because of the shortage of dollar, Myanmar has recently carried out basically yuan-based transactions and also baht-based transactions with both Thailand and China. And they are also, because they have also fuel prices, they've decided to import subsidized fuel from Russia. And their payment will be in rubles. Now, the financial sector in Myanmar can collapse if there are far more targeted sanctions. But ASEAN countries need to step up the plate. And India also needs to show that its commitment to rule of law, human rights, they must make good on this. And if China ever wants to be held as a responsible power, then it must show greater concern for the plight and suffering of the ordinary Myanmarese citizens. And that also includes the Rohingyas, no matter what definition they put on this. And if I basically wrap it up, it's just last 1 minute. Last 1 minute. In recent times, we are seeing an interesting phenomenon. The National Unity Government's PDF are carrying out basically economic insurgency because there are two parallel oil and gas pipelines. One is the Yunnan province, another one is adjacent to the Thailand, along the border of Thailand. Increasingly, PDF is carrying out attacks with the oil and gas pipeline in Thailand. You send a message that if you continue doing business with Tatmadaw, you'll be affected. But the interesting part is that whether it's Arakat Army, whether it's PDF, whether it's the KIA, all have been very averse for attacking Chinese installations. Because China is somehow acting as an intermediary with all those different groups also. And they don't want disproportionate Chinese blowback. This is something also very interesting. And in recent times, military-backed conglomerates, phone towers, there's something called Mytel, which is one of the largest networks over there. And they work with, they're working with a Vietnamese military company, which is called Viettel. So the company is known as Mytel. In recent times, 359 towers have been felled, specifically to send a message to Vietnam that, again, you should stop collaborating with this. So this economic insurgency is going to is going to continue apace. And what we have, and I'm just summing up in the last minute, what we have is in the urban areas, in the case of classic guerrilla warfare, the Tatmadaw reigns supreme, except for a few places. But in the rural areas, in the villages, in the mountainous areas, the ethnic armed organizations and the PDFs are holding strong ground. But because of massive air superiority, as mentioned by Major Shahid, eventually these armed resistance groups will start targeting Chinese installations or Indian installations if push comes to shove. And with the great game of geopolitics coming in, the fragmentation of Myanmar may not be ruled out as a remote possibility. Thank you.
Thank you, Pervez, for also giving us an insight into the Myanmar economy, both formal and informal. But a fact to note here is that the sanctions aren't really working, especially because of the fact that many of the interest powers who have imposed the sanctions are busting sanctions themselves. So Myanmar has economic contacts and cash flow coming from countries in Europe, countries in ASEAN, and certainly from India and China. So Myanmar is not in an immediate economic collapse stage. The other factor is that Myanmar has gone through a 40-year sanction before this sanction period. So they have got a tremendous amount of steel resilience that they're built for themselves. They exactly know how to live with sanctions. And since it is internally resourceful, so sanctions don't really bite in the manner that it bites in other countries. But closer to home, in Bangladesh, we are grossly worried about the large volume of drug trafficking that is now taking place between Myanmar to Bangladesh and through Bangladesh to other countries. The Rohingya refugees are becoming the largest number of drug mules. They are in the business of drug carrying as intermediary and as direct sellers. We are now also keenly observing the involvement of Bangladeshis and particularly Rohingya refugees in small arms trafficking. And certainly, a very serious threat that is already taking place is with the human trafficking that goes on from the Rohingya camps to the rest of the world and through the Rohingyas recruiting other human traffickers. So human trafficking is becoming one of the biggest problem and security concern for Bangladesh through the connections back to Myanmar. To understand the various issues of Myanmar and in particular Rakhine State, we must also understand the very strategic politics of corridors. Myanmar and particularly Rakhine is home to three major economic and strategic corridors. The first corridor that has already been implemented is CIMEC, China-Myanmar Economic Corridor, that comes up to Chakpil, and a bifurcation is going back to Yangon. Myanmar is also home to the BRI corridor. Of the 6 corridors of BRI, of which 2 are maritime corridors, one is running through Myanmar to the Indian Ocean, and it meets the economic entry point at Chakpil. Myanmar and Rakhine is also home to the future of the potential BCIM corridor. So the 3 corridors within Myanmar and within Rakhine, the CIMEC, the BRI, and the BCIM corridor makes Myanmar extremely important geostrategically to major powers, including China. So with that brief understanding, let us now open the floor to questions, comments, your observations. Please feel free to speak freely. We are talking here on Chatham House rules now. Please indicate if you want to ask a question, raise your hand, and when I give you the floor, please introduce yourself and briefly ask a short question or make a comment. Let me look around the room now before I give the floor. We'll first go to Zahid, Group Captain Zahid at the rear.
I'm Dr. Zahid Khan, Air Force officer. Thank you very much to all the panelists for a very nice and excellent presentation. I fondly recall my association with Major Shahid sir during our short visit to Myanmar, in which we had the opportunity to meet the current president. I think he was the senior general at that time. So, and later on, during my PhD, I did have the opportunity to deal on this issue. One of my articles appeared in Global Responsibility to Protect, published from Australia. So, based on those knowledge, I have 2 different questions. The first is, given that we have tried, we have not found much traction into the regional response to the Rohingya crisis, most recently we have been trying to engage the multilateral approach through the UN. Now, we know that Myanmar has already secured support from 2 permanent members, evidenced by their voting. How do you think should our foreign policy instrument work to unhinge at least China from that particular support group of Myanmar in the call for assuming greater responsibility of regional stability? Will it wait until this instability rolls into a civil war, as some of the speakers have argued, and it's in the verge of rolling into civil war. So the second part of the question relates to the civil war part, and this is more theoretical. As you know, the greatest theory of civil war, one of the greatest theories of civil war is greed and grievance theory, espoused by Professor Paul Collier. It is an empirical theory. It's based on some studies of all the civil wars. How much does the speakers think that the civil war or would-be civil war in Myanmar is will be driven by greed or grievance? Collier, of course, finds greed has more explanatory power to explain civil wars compared to grievances. Thank you.
We'll now go back to Brigadier Azaz.
Assalamu alaikum, sir. Brigadier General Azaz, former defense advisor. First of all, I want to thank the panelists for excellent deliberation. Also, General Munir sir and Mr. Soban for arranging this roundtable discussion. Now, Myanmar, as a country, because of their military rule, they are isolated from the world, and they are very strictly controlling the medias, and the information is not going out from Myanmar. So far, my knowledge goes, I visited Myanmar as a military delegation, and also I served in Bandabon region. I want to give two examples. The recent violation of Myanmar by their forces, the border shells are crossing the international boundary, coming to our territory, and they are giving an excuse that they are chasing the insurgents. I think that is not good enough. When we fought our insurgents groups back in 89 and 90s, none of our mortar shell crossed the border and landed on the other side. So we have followed that international rule. Now, even the ambassador, they are called in the foreign ministry and given the complaint, but no significance changed. Very recently, another shell landed up, and the small arms firing is going on. The people are leaving the places, but why? Previously, we never had a division and the Air Force base in that area. Now we have an infantry division in Ramo area. We have an Air Force base. So I don't say that we should go for a war, because we do not support that. But our activities, our exercise, we should be strongly dealing with this kind of violation. Otherwise, Myanmar is not giving any importance to our foreign ministry's complaint. And what Myanmar is doing, since we do not have any access to their information, but I want to add with General Shahid sir that Myanmar is not only preparing to fight the insurgents, they are also equally preparing to fight the conventional war, because they are developing their air power, strategic source, and the naval power also. They did not shift their capital from Yangon to Napito just for the sake of having a beautiful place. They have the military strategy at the back of their mind. And there is a saying that with the support of China and North Korea, they are developing their nuclear power as well. So considering all these things, we should not be very complacent that they are only busy with their insurgents, but they are equally becoming a good, strong military power, and we should give very strong reply to their border violations. Thank you, sir.
Next question from Mr. Rusht. Please introduce yourself.
Assalamu alaikum. I am Abu Rusht, editor of Bangladesh Defense Journal. What General Shahid has told, that Myanmar army, they don't have any, say, interest about external aggression or some sort of thing like that. My question is that if they don't have, why they do require multi-role fighters, Su-30? Why they have procured ballistic missiles from North Korea? Why they have procured submarine from China and India? These are all aggressive weapons. We don't have multi-role fighters. We don't have attack helicopters, but Myanmar, they have. They have the VVR missiles. VVR missiles are not required for insurgency operations. So they are increasing their military power continuously. And from 1977, we have seen that they had, they tried to create military problem with us. Thrice, in 1977, in 1991, in 2008, And then if we just discuss not about Myanmar, about the implications for Bangladesh, just come to that point. How much effort we have to put there. They have pushed nearly 1 million, what Sir has said. And Brigadier Azaz has said that, yes, these people are creating problem here, though not in a militarily, in social problem. There are drug problems, what Sir has said, human trafficking and others. But one thing is important, that this 1 million refugees here, for them, we had to raise what Sir has said, 1 infantry division. That has increased our expenditure. And by that, our intelligence agencies, our like DGFI, NSI, or law enforcement agencies, they are, say, how much, I just want to know that how much they can go further. We have limitations in our resources. They are already bogged down. They have to look after these 1 million refugees. There are multifarious problems there. They have to look at our securities. So if there is more incursions or more sort of something like that from Myanmar, we have to increase our every facilities. Our expenditure will go up. How further we can go up? These are putting burden on our shoulders. And we are peace-loving country, but for Myanmar, we might have to go for more armaments. We have to go for more expenditure, sort of something. And another thing is that.
Can you be brief, please?
Yes. To General Shah, sir. Probably you know that the junta leader, General Ming, he visited Russia twice in this year. He visited Russia in 2021 also. The Russian Defense Minister, Mr. Sergei Shoigu, he visited Myanmar just before the coup in 2021. The Chinese Foreign Minister visited Myanmar this year. And if you just see, if you just calculate, then what is your idea about it, sir?
Thank you. First, Ambassador Shamim, please.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Chairman, and thanks for inviting me to this seminar. I will just, I'll be short, and I will pick up 2 or 3 points that have gleaned from the presentation so far. The first 2 points would possibly relate to the keynote presenter, General Shahid. I just heard you saying that it is unfortunate that the West do not see beyond Aung San Suu Kyi when they approach the issue of Myanmar. Who do you think they should approach? Do you think they should sort of adopt some kind of a conciliatory attitude towards the military junta or any other political quarters? I don't know of too many political quarters in Myanmar beyond Aung San Suu Kyi. The second one is I was pretty much amused and I felt much interested in your assertion that Myanmar, in case of some kind of military clash with Bangladesh, probable or improbable, much of a strategic depth. I mean, this possibly could generate a very interesting discussion around this table, and there are many former defense senior officials. Or you could have a different separate seminar on that. Number 3 would be our foreign minister's recent remarks to the media after his meeting with the Chinese ambassador here, that China will help in initiating the repatriation of the Rohingya refugees here. What would be your comment, or anybody from the panelists at the head table? And the number 4 would be the issue of small arms. I'm particularly concerned about this because definitely there is a conduit of trafficking of small arms from Myanmar into Bangladesh. And this is a serious issue. This has serious implication because these small arms often go into the hands of not only criminal elements, but also sometimes political elements, you know. So I would suggest that the Bipss, which has now come to be regarded as a leading think tank in Dhaka, in Bangladesh could possibly organize a separate seminar on the illegal trafficking of small arms. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Shamim. The next question is from Air Vice Marshal Mahmood.
Please
introduce yourself.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I'm Air Vice Marshal retired Mahmood Hussain. I'm teaching at a university. Sir, I would like to thank all the speakers for giving a very comprehensive and very intelligent overview of Myanmar's instability. I'll just add one or 2 points. Why Myanmar is important for us. Myanmar is important for us because Myanmar is equally important for China. It is through Myanmar that China gets an access into the Indian Ocean. Now, if we look at the geopolitics of Asia and the Pacific, we find that almost all the states in the ASEAN contingent, in East Asia, Australia, and others have serious concerns about China. It is only Myanmar whom China can befriend. And if China wants to have an access, it is through Myanmar that China will have that access. And China will always make its pado stronger and stronger so that Myanmar does not fall apart. China has already got about 3 aircraft carriers, and it will roll out another 2 or 3 aircraft carriers in another 3 to 4 years. And then when those aircraft prowl the seas or waters of Indian Ocean, then China will be able to say that it's a power in the Asia Pacific. That is why, besides exploiting the resources of Myanmar itself. And the other next important point is that Myanmar is not militarily weak. Its military is battle-hardened. It has been fighting for the last 40 years insurgency, and fighting insurgency can be much more difficult than fighting conventional warfare. We have seen this in case of the United States fighting the non-conventional war in Vietnam. Had Myanmar not been strong, then it would not have violated the airspace so many times, and we have never retaliated. So what are the implications for Bangladesh? For Bangladesh's implications is that Bangladesh must have a credible deterrence, military deterrence. At least it should be qualitatively and quantitatively strong enough to take on any kind of Myanmar's attack on the southern territory of Bangladesh. If they attack and if they occupy a portion of that land in the south of Bangladesh, neither India nor China nor any other country will come and help us in rescuing that land. This is the truth. Second, what is the implication? Implication is our relationship with China. And we must also remember that Bangladesh is a democratic country, Myanmar is not. For China to turn Myanmar into another North Korea in that region will not be a difficult task. Thank you very much.
Thank you. We'll now go to Aisha Kabir from Protamalo.
I'd like to address my question to Salma Tarin. You mentioned when you were talking that India has a lot of clout with the Western world where Myanmar is concerned. And so, they could be like a conduit or mediate with the Western world and Myanmar. So since it does have so much clout, and since it's purportedly a friend of Bangladesh, couldn't Bangladesh, this is a often asked question, I know, but I think it can't be asked enough. Couldn't Bangladesh expect India then to mediate with Myanmar or put pressure on Myanmar about the Rohingyas, about the repatriation of the Rohingyas? And if it has so much clout, as you were mentioning, that it has clout with the West too, where Myanmar is concerned, then why can't we expect that from India as supposedly our friend?
Thank you, Aisha. We'll now go to Tanveer from Department of International Relations, Dhaka University.
Good morning. I'm Tanveer. I'm a lecturer of International Relations from University of Dhaka. So I believe certain things need to be decluttered before we go into this national unity government and how we might respond to this issue, right? So intersection of geopolitical and geoeconomic interest is what led to the policy congruence that we see both in India and China, which led to them both propping up the regime in Burma. If we look at recent past, then I believe Indian official development assistance to Burma has crossed in the last few years more than what they previously were. And China has been doing that as well. Both of these countries at the same time are maintaining links with the national unity government to keep up a hedging approach to this issue. They want to bet on which horse wins the race. So that is something we need to see. However, there is a catch-22 situation regarding this. If West decides to side with the start supporting that, India would also be forced to do that, because nobody wants to lose on the lucrative trade routes or the routes that they both have access to their both respective states or district provinces. That is number one. Second, in regards to Bangladesh, and especially in regards to the geopolitical realities, we need to understand that Bay of Bengal is structured like a funnel, and Bangladesh, being at the top of the funnel, has a commanding geographical position in this regard. However, Burma did not previously have the capabilities to affect our eastern sea lanes of communication that goes near the Burmese border through the Malacca Straits and to China and East Asia. They currently do with their acquisition of submarines from both China and India. And with their recent acquisition of frigates with North Korean support, they are able to do that as well. So we are gradually losing out every inch of the advantages that we had for the previous decades. Unless and until Bangladesh decides to wake up to the reality, sitting on the fence has never been helpful to any particular countries. That's number one. Secondly, given the fact that countries like Bangladesh lack strategic depth to begin with, we cannot have buffer states, or we do not have the luxury of geographical space to trade for time. Our strategies need to be congruent with the strategies of similar countries like Israel or Singapore, who follow this deterrent posture. I don't believe we can have a quantitatively advantageous position in terms of deterrence, but a qualitative approach to deterrence is something that we probably should look forward. 2 squadrons of Typhoons or Rafales, for example, would be much more effective than 3 or 4 squadrons of Sukhois, which we might not be able to afford, perhaps. So there is a lot of ground for Bangladesh to improve its position regarding this. How we approach that is a soul-searching position that Bangladesh needs to take. Thank you.
Thank you, Tanvir. Next question from Ambassador Shahid.
Thank you, Chair. Well, having heard all the speakers, the questions, and also from the floor, the subject we have is, I will not go into detail, but how does Bangladesh is implicated to the instability in Myanmar? If this is the main issue we are discussing, I think it is a big concern for Bangladesh, because I will not again dwell on the issues which already have been discussed. Question is, Prime Minister, during her recent visit to New York, she highlighted that that during the last 5 years, not a single Rohingyas have been repatriated. This is a big concern, despite she has taken this with the international bodies, the United Nations and other agencies, and nothing has worked out, including the regional countries. Now the question is, this has led to many other implications, but Bangladesh has to maintain good relations with all its neighbors, and Myanmar being one of the closest neighbors. General Shahid mentioned that they are very inward-looking, and they have their own inward problem which needs to be tackled first. But if history goes, I served in Thailand, they totally ransacked their capital, Ayutthaya, and burnt the whole capital. So they moved to today's Bangkok is the new capital which emerged out of the. So there was a sort of hate relationship once upon a time, but now I think Thailand and Myanmar maintain love and hate relations. The Thai government has also developed road communication into Myanmar, which we are also working towards it to link up with that particular road. Even we have discussed this with China, but I think still a lot to be done in this area. We have good potential of increasing our bilateral trade with Myanmar. I think despite our issues on the Rohingyas, I think our trade is still continuing. If we see from the media, a number of things are being imported from Myanmar. So this is a positive side for Bangladesh. But we have seen that the three important players, as the speakers mentioned earlier, that be that China, India, Russia, they have to maintain their own interest with Myanmar. This is the biggest country in the Southeast Asia region, the size-wise. And I will again not go into the potentials it has. These problems are there from beginning. But Bangladesh, through its strength, Bangladesh is also, one of the previous speakers was mentioned, this is a country which is hardened, battle hardened, and is continuing its own internal wars for years together. But I think Bangladesh has gone through also liberation war. Bangladesh was not prepared, but it could handle the war. But I think we need not discuss the war issue, because already this Ukraine-Russia war is giving a big headache not to the entire world. We don't want to invite another headache for ourselves. But I think there should be better ways to resolve than to think about how strength can be matched with strength. Strength has to be shown, but it need not be immediately put into action. This is my suggestion. Thank you.
Thank you. That's exactly what Tanveer was trying to convey to us, that we need to build up a qualitative and quantitative deterrence, and I think that's the way to go. Next question is from Mr. Tawhid Hussain, the former Foreign Secretary.
Thank you. I will very briefly touch upon a number of issues and then stop. First thing is that neither bilateral approach nor a multilateral approach is going to send back the refugees. It is not going to happen. Because of the limitations of the UN system, the multilateral will not work, and Myanmar has no intention of taking them back. It's plain and simple. So these are the two problems that we have. So how to send them back? Now, as we are discussing about the geopolitical and geo-economic issues, the thing is that for the big players, it is more for the strategies, etc., etc. But for us, the problem is much more practical, much more day-to-day. We are having a huge community of Rohingyas, and which is increasing every day also, and creating all sorts of problems for us. A short stay and then going back would have been completely different from what it has turned into now. What we can do then? I think there are a few things that we could think of. One is, the issue has been raised, contacts. It seems to me that we have hardly any contacts with any party who are relevant here. We have some formal contacts with the military regime, with the government, which has turned, and then since the coup, basically it has come down. The level of contact has also come down. The NUG is not going to win tomorrow and form the government, in my opinion, but then I think it is important that we have a contact. I don't know if we have, clandestinely. But even if it is clandestinely, we need to have a contact with the NUG, because NUG is the only organization which has so far recognized the Rohingyas as Rohingyas. Nobody else has done it so far. The Arakan Army has become a very important factor. Again, I would say that, well, the Arakan Army was very happy when the military crackdown on the Rohingyas took place. They supported it. Yes. One. Second, they are overtly and they are a die-hard anti-Muslim entity. This is also a fact. But still then, I personally believe that at some level, of course, not official, we should have contact with the Arakan Army also, because they are an important player. We cannot ignore them. They have made sort of an offer that Bangladesh and the Rohingyas, etc., they should come to them and they will decide how they will be repatriated, etc. Well, there has been a proposal, but it has been, I would say that, quite condescending sort of thing, which normally cannot happen between an organization and a sovereign country. But then, I would still say we should have some contacts with Rohingyas. There is an important distinction. Rohingyas are not the smallest ethnic community in Myanmar. It's pretty large. If you consider it to be 2.5 or 2.8 million in total, before they were ousted. There are much smaller communities which have an insurgency, including the Wa, which have the most successful insurgents, I would say the Wa state. They are a very small minority, of course. They are Han Chinese, so they have the support of China, etc., etc. But this is the only ethnic community which does not have an insurgency. They don't have arms in their hands. I do not consider the Arsa a reality. It's either a myth or maybe it's a farce sort of thing. They have done nothing in favor of the Rohingyas so far. I'm not saying anything, but I'm just pointing it out that such issues have never been resolved peacefully. And if there is a civil war, as has been indicated, or as has been, thought by many here, a non-combatant will not get anything at the end of the civil war. I'll stop there on this issue. A new wave of Rohingya refugees? No way. Our Western friends may be unhappy that we are not giving them shelter again, but then we cannot allow any more Rohingyas to come to Bangladesh. We have done our part, let others do their parts. Foreign Minister has said China will help about the Rohingyas. He says many things. But anyway, this is not going to happen. China, we have already discussed that they have tremendous interest in keeping Myanmar happy. So that's not going to happen. India is not going to help. Forget about those. Think about some new strategy, new friends who might, in the long run, help us. I don't know who they are going to be. I think we should make one thing clear to China. We don't need to be appeasing all the time. China has interests in our country as we have interests with China. We should clearly tell them that they should not build anything in Myanmar, in Rakhine State, which have been untied through the process of ethnic cleansing. I am told that they are doing things like that. We should tell them that those places must be kept for these people to return, because they cannot stay forever in Bangladesh. I'll stop there, I think.
Thank you, Tawhid. But in the interest of understanding, what I would like to ask you, how do we stand diplomatically on the issue of Rohingya and our bilateral relationship with Myanmar? Are we diplomatically isolated?
Shall I go back to Frederick the Great?
Short answer.
Diplomacy without armaments is music without instruments.
Interesting points, and if there is a MOFA rep here in the audience, I don't know, please take note of the interesting points that the Secretary has said. A point that I would like to point out is that please watch RSO. Very recently, the news that is coming out that the RSO is in the process of acquiring arms, which was not the case before at all. And if RSO is in the process of acquiring arms, and in some places trying to confront the AA, then a new dynamics is again forming in Rakhine. And also with the relations that we have with the Rohingya issues. So it's a very dynamic process and a dynamic process of a conflict building. And one point that I would like to again emphasize, there is no military solution to the crisis. We firmly believe in Bipss that we must find out a diplomatic and a peaceful way of finding a resolution to the current crisis. At the same time, no diplomacy is diplomacy without deterrence. There has to be a biting power behind all diplomatic moves and maneuvers. We will now come to the last question, and I would like to offer the floor to anybody, our young friends from the university. Anyone?
Thank you, sir. I am Musaddiq Ahmed, student of East West University. We know in 1st February 2021, Myanmar military junta take the power. Since then, Myanmar has been unstable. Recently, 6 mortar shells fired inside Bangladesh on Khumdum border in Bandarban. Can we consider it is the threat for Bangladesh? If it is, what are the possible things taken by Bangladesh to prevent the threat from Myanmar? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Any last minute thought before I go back to the panelists? All right. We'll now again go back to our panelists and give each one of you 2 to 3 minutes to respond. We'll start with Shahid.
Thank you very much. I will first answer some of the queries on military. As I was saying that Myanmar army has been, if you see their constitution, there's a one word they've been using again and again, is called disintegration. So whatever is there, they are designed not to, it was inward looking, and all the, whole army is designed on infantry basis, number one. Number two, whatever the weapons system you are seeing, especially the air cover, all the airs what you are seeing here at this moment, recently near our border, these are flown from either Miktila or Mandalay. So you know these places. Near our border, none of them, there are 2 airfields, none of them can take either MiG-29 or a Su or JF-17. None of them has that capability. Yes, they have shifted some of their Mi-24 or 35 and Ka-52. These are the 2 they have shifted. But why I say that they are not designed? Because they are purely infantry-based, designed to fight insurgency. And some of them, you will be horrified to know that some of the battalions, which I could not cover, that some of the battalions have got less than 20 to 30% of the authorized strength. So you can well imagine how they are. Yes, there is a formation called LID, Light Infantry Division. Yes, they are the, dangerous, all those ethnic groups, whoever staying around the Myanmar, they really shiver whenever they hear that LIDs are coming, because they really follow scorched earth policy, and they follow these 4-cut policies, and they really do the destructions of wherever they go. And number 3 is that a lot of are asking about the shell landing on Bangladesh. Shell landing on Bangladesh doesn't mean that we should also start firing at that. Yes, we know what is happening on the other side there. Though this is a little bit, I could explain on that, but because of the time, I can't. But one thing which we can do is the posturing. That is very important. And this time, I'm sorry to say, previously, our Air Vice Marshal was there. Previously, they used to do, there is a certain thing called posturing. As Sir was saying that in 78, we were very young nation, number one. Number two, we are also weak. But it is the Foreign Secretary at that moment and DGBDR, Jan Atik, and Amadir Pratham Foreign Secretary. They are the one who actually dealt with the whole thing. And one of our Joint Secretary who threatened, and that it is what international headline, that he threatened Myanmar that either you take it or we're going to give them weapon. So, what I'm trying to say, posturing is very important. Yes, weapon is there, but posturing of the leaders and leadership is very important. And number 3 is that NUD and PDF, what we are saying, that I'm sorry to say, these are the old wines in the new bottle. Who all are NUGs? Who all are PDFs? They are the NLDs, Aung San Suu Kyi's foot soldiers. And they are, I repeat, they are not integrated with the insurgents. If they had been with the insurgents, yes, I should have been worried that yes, it's going to happen, it's going to disintegrate. I can assure you, since they are not integrated, and they also don't believe, insurgents, they don't believe NUG and PDFs. So that portion of civil war is not there yet. And another thing is that Rush was saying about the ballistic missile, aircraft and submarine. In fact, I'm not worried about their navy, their army. Yes, I'm a little bit worried about Air Force, because we used to have a air parity for a long time, but unfortunately recently they have procured Su-34, JF-17, then they are also buying more, just FT-2000 they have bought last month. So this parity which we used to have, yes, it's broken, and yes, we are worried about that one. Our government must do certain things, but other things that, Rosta, I'm not worried about how submarines and all those, I'm not worried about that one. And in fact, the picture on the map is only small portion. In all the Chinese main, what is it called? They had to bypass Malacca Strait. For that one, it's not only Indian Ocean. They are also going to Strait of Thai, and also there are 2 more accesses, which I don't know whether you can see or not. From there, there are 2 more accesses on the map, which is also passing through Myanmar, or Myanmar is giving them access. So Myanmar is a $40 billion investment for Chinese just after Pakistan, China-Pakistan Economic Forum of $60 billion. And Bangladesh is $20+ billion. So I leave it to your imagination where Myanmar stands, where we stand, where, I mean, who you should pick up. And about the Rohingyas, I agree, sir, I fully agree with you that Rohingyas and Arsas are, to me, they are low-level drug peddlers, you know, and extortionists. They are no insurgents, number one. Number two, yes, we should be worried about Arakan. This is a very big game is going on in Arakan. If Arakan army wins, I can assure you it will have a tremendous impact on Indian interest in Rakhine state, because the Kaladan project which they are going to get it operated next year, I've got all the doubt, number one. Number two, in that one, that access Myanmar, Bangladesh, and Myanmar, China, or Myanmar, India, all these borders will be controlled by Arakan army. Just last month, September, Indian Situate Councillor, he was saying in an open forum that India is thinking of discussing, rather negotiating with the Arakan army so that they can get access to this Kaladan project. So you can well imagine the Rakhine. There is a saying in Myanmar, especially with Baman, that if you see a snake and a Rakhine, whom do you kill first? They say, kill the Rakhine first, then go for killing the snake. Because Rakhine is very dangerous, you know. You can't believe them. You cannot, you know, today if we help them, you'll find that tomorrow they are going to different things. So that's all. Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you, Shahid. Tareen, you have the floor for 2 minutes.
Thank you. There was a question, how much we expect India to play a mediator role in case of Rohingya refugee crisis. I think we cannot expect anything from India in this particular case, in case of Rohingya repatriation, because India took, being a democratic country, being a historically friendly nation, India took a long time to even call these people as Rohingyas also. So from that aspect, we cannot expect any kind of help other than just diplomatic statements or just condemnation, those things. We cannot expect anything. I was basically trying to say that India could be a mediating factor to reduce the amount of sanctions over Myanmar, or to make it easier for Myanmar or Tatmadaw to become economically more effective, because India has significant investments or interests, as we discussed, in Myanmar, and India will try to also pursue United States in a way that it do not look, it doesn't look towards Myanmar, the US, it doesn't look towards Myanmar from a just value-based democracy point of view, rather from a very geopolitical point of view, because as India is shifting, or US is shifting its attention towards Indo-Pacific, Myanmar is in the center of Indo-Pacific, and they will not want China to take over Myanmar right at this moment, because China is desperate about Myanmar. The way we cannot expect anything from India, we cannot also expect anything from China in terms of Rohingya repatriation. And Sir has also told that these are just things just to say. And there was a question also from Good Captain Zahid sir, that what are the things we can do actually, and especially with regard to China, or how our foreign policy should work. I think we have to have a very pessimistic view about this. Definitely we need to concentrate, or we need to focus more on having a strong defense diplomacy or developing a strong defense diplomacy right now to have more weapons or armaments or to have compatibility with the superior air power of Myanmar. But definitely we cannot think of a war. We cannot go to a war with Myanmar. We cannot fall into the provocations by Myanmar. We need to think very clearly whatever things are going on inside the minds of Tatmadaw, and we need to act very consciously so that we don't do any mistake. And also in terms of there are people who might think about suggesting the government to recognize UNG or to have a communication with the UNG, but that might prove a very risky undertaking for Bangladesh as well, because if we just do such mistakes or if we try to maintain any kind of relation beyond Tatmadaw, in that case there might be actually a second wave of refugees or Rohingyas, and there will be no one actually to help us, as we already know. So we need to definitely we need to have a very strong diplomatic approach, but we have constraints because we know if we go to the UN, there is Russia, China, and the intensifying ties between Russia and Myanmar in recent years, and this year as well due to the visits of the military chief to Russia to attend the Eastern Economic Forum in Vladivostok, and also China has told that we will support the Myanmar military at any cost, at whatever is the situation of the civil war. So from all these aspects, we cannot expect that any prosperity or any progress will be made at the UN as well because of the veto of from these states. So actually what we can do, we don't have much to do apart from maintaining a very strong diplomatic ties or networks or utilizing our networks actually. We need to, I mean, China might be thinking about their image as an international player or as a responsible global player in many respects, but I don't think in this respect or in this regard China is going to think about their prestige. Even they are bending their historical way of foreign policy of not interfering in other states' internal matters. They are bending this policy for Myanmar as well. So we cannot expect actually Myanmar to do anything also. We need to maintain. I mean, although we cannot expect a lot in the short term or even in the long run, but what we need to do is we need to keep pursuing, we need to raise our voices wherever we can, and also definitely the deterrence we need to have, defense deterrence that I was telling that we need to have a strong diplomacy as well. What went wrong with us that we are not finding anyone beside us? We need to have a very careful and critical observation right now, I think. And also with regard to Rohingya refugees, although we cannot do anything that might outrage the Tatmadaw so that they push out the remaining Rohingyas, but still we need to have a very strong deployment at the border so that we can also seal all our entry points and we can have a realistic view rather than having a humanitarian approach in the coming days, if anything, anything occurs like another wave of refugees. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Tareen. The last comment from Pervez, please take 2 minutes.
Last and also the least. Let me be, because I have been uncharacteristically very subdued because my topic was very boring. But now I have the chance to break free, at least for 3 minutes. What most people are trying to say, but because this is such a polite and august gathering, what we should do in Myanmar, we cannot discuss in this gathering. Let's put it like this. What we need to do to convince Myanmar, whether it's Aung Suu Kyi or Tatmadaw, to take the Rohingyas back, cannot be discussed in this, within the confines of this hall, except for some insinuations or winks or here and there. Our Pakistani friends in South Asia, because Pakistan gained a lot of traction during the Soviet Union's invasion of Afghanistan, or during the war on terror in case of General Pervez Musharraf. At that time, President Ziaur Rahman or President Pervez Musharraf or General Pervez Musharraf, whichever way you like it, was the West's favorite leader, most photogenic. Recently, President Biden has stated, again, it's not for me to pass any comments, General Biden has stated that Pakistan is a very dangerous place in terms of geostrategy. I'm paraphrasing, but that was the idea. And after years of service, and I'm even discounting President Ayub Khan's association with the West, what is the abject lesson? If you become a blunt tool for someone's disposal, whether it's China, whether it's India, or whether it's the West or Russia, you will be used and you'll be discarded. Be careful for which battle you want to fight. I'm here to defend every inch of territorial sovereignty of a country, but it's easy for me. I'm an armchair crusader. I won't be risking my life and limb. None of us will be. It will be our soldiers. So, where will he create this deterrence? Military diplomacy. Something which has been downplayed by the foreign ministry, has been made a laughing stock, and we are paying the price. And the worst part is we say, oh, yes, and just before I end, there's also a reality check. Just calling Myanmar, Burma to please the West or get some contracts or consultancy is fine. But why shall I fight a battle if I cannot acquire territorial possession of, because see, talk of war is cheap. Right now, Bangladesh is also going through under severe economic crisis. 7 to 8 hours of electricity cuts. We are negotiating an IMF bailout package under environmental concerns. And when our resources are so constrained, how can we afford military, and I'm all for military mobilization and for deployment, but you have to be very common. See, the Tatmadaw doesn't care about the people. It's a different country, it's a different people. It's a Bamar majority hegemony over there. Our priorities are different. And we should have seen the Rohingya crisis coming, because The Economist had come up with a report that the Tatmadaw was planning a mass genocide in 2015. What were we doing? Has anyone been held accountable in the responsible positions? These are questions, it's very easy to point at someone else. Why did we allow this to pass? Why did we allow our aerial superiority to be eroded? Why is it that today we have to say so many things instead of doing the only thing? And it's also our cultural arrogance, because we only look to the Indians. We never considered about Myanmar, about Luki's policy. We inherited the superiority of and arrogance of the Calcutta Babus, who look down on the Burmese. We are paying that price. We should ask those questions. The answers will not be straightforward. Thank you.
Thank you, Pervez, also for your very thought-provoking comments at the end. I shall not try to summarize because the discussion has been so varied and so rich. But I will only remind you of the certain key takeaways that I go from here. Issues have been raised about the Rohingya refugees, and the key takeaway for me is that we need to re-strategize. We are perhaps going beyond the humanitarian phase of the Rohingya refugee crisis. So we need to understand the complexities of long-stay refugees in a country. And that's a reality. Aspirations of repatriation can remain, but we have to cope with the realities of the long stay and have strategies to cope with that. To understand the complexities of our bilateral relationships and the complexities of the potential security issues and even potential conflict, we have to have a very, very clear understanding of the state of the power play in the state of Myanmar. So Myanmar, in some cases, is a minority player. The majority player are the big players. The interest of the United States and the West, the Chinese interest, the Indian interest, and now beginning with the Russian interest. And that is a complex power play that we need to comprehend if we have to have a proper Myanmar strategy. We saw everybody mention that we need to increase our engagement with Myanmar, a country we have ignored historically. We have never focused sufficiently on Myanmar. So thereby, we have very weak capacity internally to deal with different issues of Myanmar. How many people do we have in the ministry who know the language of Myanmar? Almost none. And that kind of weakness goes back to all other sectors. We generally agreed that diplomacy should play its role, but a diplomacy that really works, and a diplomacy that is backed by deterrence, credible deterrence. In understanding Rakhine, and in particular understanding Myanmar, we need to understand the issues of BRI, IPS, or Indo-Pacific Strategy, and the Indian Ocean in particular. It is all about the maritime strategy of the region and the global maritime strategy. That is coming to the fore. And unless we understand that, we'll be missing out much of the meat of the whole story. And lastly, a point that was discussed in Bipss in the pre-discussion phase of this event, pointed out by our senior fellow Shafkat, that the Myanmar strategy cannot be left to one single ministry in Bangladesh. It needs a combined, comprehensive approach. So thereby, we might think of creating a task force under the PMO that has representation from all the key ministries that are involved in the response mechanism. It has to be economic response, it has got to include security response, humanitarian response, foreign policy response, and many of such responses. At the moment, we don't see that coherent strategy in Bangladesh. We are all working in our own silos. We have to go beyond that and go into a comprehensive strategy. So with that very small summary of a rich discussion, I would like to thank you all for your comments, questions, and with the very rich discussion we had today. And I now go back to our co-sponsor or co-partner, Mr. Zafar Soban, editor of Dhaka Tribune, to give the final remarks.
Thank you very much, General. There's very little for you to add to your very comprehensive summing up of what has been a very rich and engaging discussion. I think what I would like to say is that in the last 5 years since the influx of the Rohingya refugees over our border in 2017, I have been part of or witnessed or been in the audience of many discussions where we've talked about the Rohingya refugee crisis, and of course this has been a subject which has been debated and discussed greatly both by the government, civil society, as well as the diplomatic community here in Bangladesh and of course internationally. But I think what we've done here today is something which is done very seldom, which is really try to contextualize the Rohingya crisis within the context of the full picture of what is happening in Myanmar. And I think that's a discussion which doesn't really happen with sufficient frequency. And I think it's very important for us here in Bangladesh, as well as international players, to really see the full picture rather than, in fact, if we focus only on the Rohingya issue, we're really only getting a partial picture. And if you only look at a partial picture, of course, solutions will continue to elude us. Equally, what we have done today is look at the Rohingya issue within the geopolitical context of the other players who influential and who have a stake in what is happening in Myanmar. Specifically, we have mentioned the role of China and India and increasingly Russia. But what's also interesting is other ASEAN countries such as Singapore, South Korea, Thailand also have their stakes, and that has also come out fairly elaborately in today's discussion. So I think what's very important here is this contextualization. One of the things which I think is very apparent to me, listening to the discussions, the very good presentations made by our three panelists, the interventions by those in the audience, is when you look at things in when you contextualize the Rohingya issue within the picture of, within the bigger picture of both the full vision of what's happening in Myanmar as well as regionally and globally, we're very much on our own. And I think this is really the fundamental crux of the dilemma Bangladesh faces, is that we really don't have any allies, there's no one to help us on the international stage. Even countries, this is to Aisha's question earlier, we think of as our great allies in other ostensible allies on other fronts have really not come to the fore. And looking at the bigger picture, the reasons for this become immediately apparent. At the end of the day, strategically, geopolitically, as well as geoeconomically, Myanmar is a far greater import to these countries than we are. And it's a very simple calculus, I think, for them. Now, in conclusion, I think one of the points which has been made is that the instability in Myanmar, which is now, in fact, has been building up steadily over the last several months and is really, approaching perhaps a tipping point, is, in fact, extremely relevant to the Rohingya situation and indeed our situation in terms of hosting the Rohingyas in the crisis we face. There's a non-trivial possibility of the entire country tipping into civil war, of complete disintegration, and that will in fact impact the Rohingya situation as well. And so this is something which we in Bangladesh need to be prepared for. I mean, there are tremendous risks associated with it, but cue the comments made both overtly and also by suggestion from some of the panelists here and the speakers here, that may also be an opportunity for Bangladesh. Either way, whether it's a risk or opportunity, we need to be vigilant and we need to be alive to what the changing situation in Myanmar, the impact that's going to have on our issues vis-a-vis the Rohingyas. And finally, and I think this is the point which many of the speakers as well as the panelists have made, is that what we really need is a far more comprehensive and coherent strategy for dealing with not just, and this gets to the major point, not just the Rohingya crisis, but Myanmar is our neighbor. This is, this is a country we share a border with, and it's quite clear that in terms of our diplomacy, it has been criminally ignored and neglected. And we have focused on this very poorly, and as a result, we find ourselves in the quandary we face. We've really been sleepwalking, certainly historically over the last several decades, but even more unforgivably in the last 5 years since the crisis has reared its head here in Bangladesh. We have done very little to really put our relationships and our communication and our understanding of Myanmar and what we need to do on the kind of priority footing that we need to do. So, in conclusion, what's really necessary, I think, is for Bangladesh to perhaps stop sleepwalking on this issue and really, in a comprehensive way. The General had mentioned that perhaps what is necessary is a multi-ministry coordination to really deal with this issue. And as I've mentioned before, dealing with the Rohingya crisis means not just focusing solely on the Rohingya crisis in isolation. It actually means dealing with the entirety of Myanmar is our neighbor to the east, and dealing with the entirety of Myanmar insofar as it is situated in global geopolitics, geoeconomics, and geostrategy. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Zafar. This brings us to the end. So before we end, please join me in thanking our panelists for today for their excellent presentations. So once again, ladies and gentlemen, thank you all for being here today. We look forward to having you again next month for our joint event with Dhaka Tribune on another key strategic issue, which will be notified to you in time. Please join us for a cup of coffee outside. Thank you.